Hi, my name's Stuart Thompson, and welcome to my second video in a series on getting started with Git. Last time we looked at creating a new local repository, adding files, committing files, working with staged commits, and then reviewing the logs of commits that have been made. Today, I'd like to look at working with remotes, specifically a remote called BitBucket. BitBucket, GitHub, and a few others are cloud-hosted remotes for Git repositories. They can be used as central or master repositories in larger development teams where developers will maintain local repos and then sync with a single master repo, such as on GitHub or BitBucket, so that they're all pulling and pushing from the same place. Before we start working with BitBucket, however, I'd like to do a little bit of work with SSH keys and setting up our shell. This will help us to interact with that remote host without having to enter our username and password every time we issue a command. An SSH key is like a certificate over HTTP. It is a way of setting up a public-private key pair that you register with BitBucket and run in an agent on your local machine, such that when you send a command to BitBucket, BitBucket can use the key to verify the authenticity of your machine and allow the transaction to go through. Let's start by creating an SSH key locally. I'm going to create my key in my home folder in a directory called .ssh. So we use the mkdir for make directory .ssh command. Here we can see in Windows Explorer that the .ssh directory has been created. Next, we move into that folder with cd, and then we run a command called ssh keygen to generate the public-private key pair. First, we have to enter a file name into which we want to save the key. I'm going to call mine bbkey for BitBucket key, but you can name it whatever you would like. Then you need to enter a passphrase, and finally the key is created. We can enter that SSH directory and see bbkey and bbkey.pub. The private file has no extension, and the public key has the .pub extension. Now, we want to have an agent that runs and hosts this key for us so that it's automatically passed to BitBucket whenever we issue a command. For this, we're going to move back to the home directory. I'm going to clear my console, and we're going to create a file, or touch a file, create an empty one called .bashrc. Touch is a command in the bash shell that simply creates an empty file with the name provided. Now we can see in Windows Explorer we have a .bashrc. We can right-click, say Open With, and Notepad, and edit this bashrc file, which is our startup script. So we'll call it bash startup script. Put a little comment in there with the pound as a leading character. Now first we want to start the SSH agent and register the BitBucket key. We do this with a command eval $SSS agent in parentheses. Then we can run SSH add and the path to our key file. In this case, home directory.ssh bbkey. Finally, as a little nicety in this startup script, I like to change into the dev directory. We achieve that with cd/c/stu/dev. This just means that when you start up a new bash shell, it will automatically start the agent, register the SSH key, and then change into the working development directory. I'm going to save and close that bashrc file, and then I'm going to touch a second file called bash logout. This is run whenever the bash shell is exited, and here we can register commands that will remove our key from the agent. We do that with ssh add -d, and then the path to the key we'd like to remove. Remove key from agent, and then kill the agent. We don't want it running after we've stopped using the shell. We do that with kill $SSS agent underbar PID. So SSS agent PID. That's all we need in the close down script, so we can save and close that. And now let's exit the shell so that we can have the command run when we start. When we open a new shell, we now see the SSS agent is started, and we're asked for the passphrase that we use to generate the key. When you enter that passphrase, the identity is added to the agent, and now the agent that is running in the background has that private key of the private-public key pair ready to send to BitBucket whenever you issue a command. The last thing we need to do is to go into our home directory and .ssh and touch a file called config. Config is a way for us to specify which SSH key to use with which host. So if we navigate in Windows Explorer into the .ssh directory and then edit that config file, we can enter host bitbucket.org space on the second line, that single space is important, and then identity file and the name of the file. What this does is says whenever BitBucket is looking for a key to interact with, whenever we're sending a command to bitbucket.org, go ahead and use this identity file as the one to post. So let's close and save that config file, and now we're all done setting up our shell for SSH. Now we can go to the BitBucket website and register the public key with BitBucket. First, you'll need to create an account. For that, go to https://bitbucket.org and follow the instructions to register a new free account. I recommend pausing this video and then continuing when you're on this dashboard page after logging in. Now that you've created a new account, we can register the public SSH key that we generated with bitbucket.org, and that will allow us to start interacting with it. Go ahead and click on the user icon in the top right of the browser, and then select Manage Account. From the left-hand navigation, select SSH Keys, and then click Add Key. We'll need to label our key. I'm going to call mine Stu Gaming Key. And then we'll need to go back to Windows Explorer and open that public key in Notepad or your text editor of choice. Select the whole key, copy it, and then paste it into the dialog on the BitBucket site. This is the public key. This is the part of the key that we share with BitBucket. We click Add Key, and then you can see in the list a new key has been added just now. That's our new SSH key that we'll use to interact. Great, now that we have the new key registered and an agent running with it, we can create a new repository and sync the Git intro repository that we created in part 1 with BitBucket. For that, let's create repository, name it. I'm going to call mine Git intro to match the name of the repository on my local drive, and then give it a brief description. Intro repo for demo. The access level can be left as a private repository, meaning only you will be able to see it. Forking we'll talk about in a later video, but for now, allow only private forks is sufficient. The repository type is Git, and we don't need any project management. For language, I'm going to select HTML and CSS, although this isn't critical. It changes the icon that is displayed on the dashboard to help you locate repositories more easily. When you're ready, click Create Repository, and we'll be taken to the repository setup screen. I'm going to collapse this sidebar so we have a bit more space to work with. And the instructions on the repository setup screen explain how to work with SourceTree to get started, a tool from Atlassian for working with Git. We're going to use the command line as we have been so far. And I'm going to select the instructions for I have an existing project. Now these instructions say if you already have a Git repository on your computer, let's push it up to BitBucket. So this would be a developer creating a new repository and then pushing it to BitBucket to get a project started. The instructions are to change into the repository directory, so cd, and what I'll do is leave these to the left so we can run alongside. So we'll cd into our repository. If you remember, that was in, for me, C stu dev, and then a folder named Git intro. Now we're in our repository. We can see we're on the branch master. Then we need to add a remote. In this case, we're going to add the remote BitBucket. The command is git remote add, the name of the remote. By convention, this is usually called origin for that central repository, but you could name it whatever you like. And then the address of that remote, which is listed in the instructions. In this case, it's git@bitbucket.org, your username minus Stuart Thompson, / the name of the repo, gitintro.git. That adds the remote named origin, and we can interrogate the list of remotes by saying git remote, and see that a remote named origin has been added. Next, we're going to push all of our stuff to the upstream origin. So we say git push -u origin -- all. Note the double hyphen in the instructions. Some Git commands use a single hyphen, others use a double hyphen. This is one that uses a double. When you say git push -u origin all, you're first asked if you would like to confirm that bitbucket.org can use the SSH key that we generated. Type yes. This is the only time you'll need to type this. It's a one-time confirmation. And that adds BitBucket to the list of permanently known hosts. Then Git tells us that to git@bitbucket.org, gitintro.git, it's sending a new branch, master, which is tracking master, and that the branch master is set up to track the remote branch master from origin. So now what we've done is actually push all of the history, all of the commits from our local repository into BitBucket. Before we do that, let's just investigate those 4 lines about the SSH key. I like to really understand what's going on whenever I make changes to my machine. So on your machine, if we go into the home directory and into the .ssh directory, you'll see a new file called called known hosts. Known hosts lists the hosts by their DNS name and IP and which keys they're allowed to access. You've approved that BitBucket is allowed to use the SSH key. And if we look at that known hosts file, we can see bitbucket.org at this IP has been allowed to use that particular key. That's all on that. I just wanted to mention why that was there, why those messages were there, and what was achieved by typing yes at that prompt. So now that we've added our new remote, we've registered our key with BitBucket, we've pushed our repository to BitBucket, and we've pushed these 4 commits as part of that repository, we can go back to the BitBucket site and click on the left-hand menu, Commits. If we expand this sidebar, we can see it's called Commits down here in the repository Stuart Thompson /git intro. And here, BitBucket will list for us all of the commits that it sees for this repository. We can compare 4C12197 and see the commit 4C12197, my first commit, has indeed made it up there. Adding a new file was the next one. Modifies the new file, and then update commands.txt. So in this way we can see that we've pushed our repository out to the remote BitBucket. Let's very quickly clear our console and make a change in cstudev git intro to the commands file, for example. Now I'm going to use VI. You could use any text editor you like, including Notepad. And I'm just going to say, these are the commands used in part 1. We've edited that file now. We can look at the contents of commands.txt and see the new line. These are the commands used in part 1. And then I'm going to add that file, same as we did in the first part. Commit with a message of adds a line to commands.txt. And then finally, git push. So first time we had to say git push -u origin all. That was to register origin as the upstream for this repository. Because if we just typed git push and had multiple remotes, how would Git know where to push to? What we do is list a single one for convenience that we would like to push to. So the git push -u origin was there to say to Git, next time I say push, I mean origin. We also don't need to say all because this isn't our first time. So from now on, we can just say git push. And when we push, we get a big long message like this. Again, a lot of this is first time setup. If we read this, Git is very verbose. We see that Git2 has changed its behavior from matching to simple. all of this text is really saying, would you like to use the matching behavior or the simple behavior? One-time setup, type git config -- global push.default simple. Then you'll never see that message again. Now we can git push at will, and we're told everything's up to date because the push went through. Everything was pushed to git@bitbucket.org, Stuart Thompson, git intro.get. That's all I'd like to say in part 2, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again in part 3.